I remember the exact day she showed up. It was a Monday, gray, humid, the kind of Florida morning where the air sticks to your skin like wet cotton. Everyone at Millfield High was dragging their feet back from fall break, still half asleep and not ready to face the second half of the semester. Then she walked into third period American history. Miss Harrow. She didn't say much that day, just wrote her name on the board in slow, elegant letters. Harrow. No first name, no Ms. or Mrs., just Harrow. That alone should have been weird, but somehow it wasn't the strangest thing about her. What really stood out, what we all noticed, was the silence. When she entered the room, it got quiet. I'm not talking about the usual hush teachers get when they walk in. I mean silent, the kind of stillness you feel at a funeral, like the air itself is holding its breath. She didn't take attendance, didn't smile, just looked around the room with these deep, dark eyes. So dark, they didn't even reflect the light. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, too soft, but we heard every word, like it was being whispered directly into our ears. History, she said, is not what you think it is. That was it, her whole introduction. We thought maybe she was trying to be dramatic. Maybe she was one of those teachers who really wanted to make a point. But something in the way she said it stuck with me, like a splinter in the back of my brain. Weird things start small. It wasn't long before the rumors started. A few students said they saw her in the teacher's lounge, just standing there, staring at the vending machine for 10 straight minutes. Others claimed she never blinked. One girl swore up and down she saw Harrow's shadow moving against the hallway lights. I didn't believe it, not at first, but then little things started happening. The clocks in her room ticked out of sync. Phones died the second you stepped across her doorway, and no matter where you sat, you always felt like she was watching you. She gave us strange assignments, not papers or quizzes, but questions, one-liners she'd write on the board in blood-red ink. If you could erase one event in history, what would it cost you? Would you bleed for the truth? We all thought it was part of some experimental teaching method, to get us to think outside the box. Then I saw the notebook. The notebook. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was helping clean up after class one day when she stepped out into the hallway. Her desk drawer was open just enough for me to see the corner of something sticking out. It looked old. Like really old. Worn leather, pages yellowed and frayed. I couldn't help myself. I pulled it out. That's when I saw it. Drawings of strange symbols. Circles within circles. Spirals. People standing around something that looked like a hole or maybe a well. All of them facing inward. All of them bleeding from the eyes. And on one page, in neat, careful handwriting, were 5 names. Jason, Amy, Eric, Rebecca, Dean. My name was first. The feeling. Something about that moment. My fingers on the paper. The ink soaking into my skin. It felt wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to see it. Like the book saw me back. Miss Harrow walked in right as I was sliding it back into the drawer. She didn't say anything. Just looked at me. Not angry. Not surprised. Just calm. Like she'd been waiting for me to look. Be careful with history, Jason, she said, with that same soft, eerie voice. It remembers who touches it. What comes next? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the spiral, spinning slow and endless, pulling me in. I woke up drenched in sweat. My phone screen was cracked. The charger had melted. And on my desk, where I knew I hadn't written anything, were the words, "The fifth must witness." I didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but I was about to find out. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I stayed up, sitting at the edge of my bed, just staring at the words on my desk. The fifth must witness. I kept telling myself it was some kind of prank. Maybe I'd written it in my sleep. Maybe one of my friends was screwing with me. But deep down, I knew better. No one else knew about the notebook. No one else had seen those names. I couldn't stop thinking about the list. Jason, Amy, Eric, Rebecca, Dean. We weren't exactly a group. Amy was in my English class, quiet, artistic, always drawing creepy stuff on her notebook covers. Eric was that kid who always sat in the back and never talked unless someone pissed him off. Rebecca, top of the class, straight A type. Dean was a football guy. We had nothing in common. No reason to be tied together, except that we were. Somehow Miss Harrow had picked us, chosen us, or worse, known us, known something we didn't. Everywhere I went, I started seeing spirals, scratched into bathroom stalls, doodled on the corners of old textbooks, even carved into the wood of my desk in Harrow's class, like it had been there long before I ever sat in that seat. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I caught Amy tracing one into the condensation on her water bottle during lunch. She didn't even realize she was doing it. When I asked her about it, she blinked like she'd just woken up. Huh? It's just something I saw in a dream, I think. Miss Harrow's lessons were getting weirder, too. She stopped using textbooks entirely. Instead, she'd write names and dates on the board, events that didn't make sense, battles no one had heard of, presidents that never existed. In 1873, the town of Millfield witnessed the sky open for the third time. President Walter Lynch was the only U.S. leader to erase his own inauguration. History, children, is a suggestion. Truth is what bleeds through. We all just stared at her, too confused or too afraid to ask questions. Eric was the first one to really change. He stopped showing up to lunch, sat alone in the courtyard, even when it rained. His eyes looked sunken, darker. Not like he was tired, like he'd seen something and hadn't slept since. One day, I caught him whispering to himself during class, just mouthing words silently, over and over again. His lips formed the phrase, "The pit remembers, the pit remembers." I tried talking to him after school. He just stared at me for a long moment and said, "She's opening it, whether you're ready or not." I started looking for answers, snuck into the school library after hours, thinking maybe Miss Harrow had left something behind. Some clue. That's where I found the book. No title, just a cracked leather cover and pages filled with old handwriting and bizarre sketches. Spirals, symbols, people kneeling around what looked like a deep hole in the ground. The same stuff from Harrow's notebook. But this one had something new. Folded between two pages was a torn piece of paper, written in faded red ink. They chose 5 before. Only the 5th can see it open. And under that, witness, or be swallowed. The next morning, Rebecca didn't come to school. No one said a word. No teacher took attendance. It was like she'd never existed. Her locker was empty. Her name was gone from the seating chart. When I asked around, people gave me blank stares. Even Amy said, "Who's Rebecca?" Like the name meant nothing to her. That's when it hit me. The notebook didn't just list us. It was a countdown. I found Amy after school, sketching in her journal under the bleachers. When I asked her about the spiral again, she got quiet. "It's not just a dream," she finally said. It's a place." She flipped through her sketchbook and showed me the drawing. A deep pit, surrounded by 5 figures in black robes. A spiral etched into the ground. Something massive, wrong, lurking just beneath the surface. "I think we're standing on it," she whispered. "Right now." Couldn't breathe. That night, as I was heading home, something strange happened. The school bell rang. Twice. At 8:46 p.m. No one was there. The halls were empty. But I swear, from the far end of the building, I heard it, her voice. 2 have seen. 3 remain. The gate stirs. It was Rebecca. I knew it, even if no one else remembered her. She was the first. One name gone from the list. For left. And if what I'd read in that old book was true, the countdown had already started. I stopped sleeping. Barely ate. My thoughts were spinning in circles just like that damn spiral. I went back to the town library, this time to the archives in the basement. A place that smelled like mildew and secrets. Old newspapers, town records, dust thick enough to write warnings in. The librarian, Mr. Leland, gave me a side eye but didn't stop me. Maybe he saw something in my face. Maybe he'd seen it before. I dug through records going back to the 1800s. Millfield had always been odd. Quiet disappearances. Families leaving in the dead of night. Fires with no origin. One incident every 50 years, always in October, always 5 people. Each time, the 5th one, the witness, was the only one who survived. Then I found it. A photocopy of a yearbook page from 1900. Black and white, grainy, teachers with thick collars and cold eyes. And there, at the bottom right, stood a woman in a long black dress. No smile, just a dead stare into the camera. Her name? Ms. H. No full name, just like now. She looked exactly like Miss Harrow. Not younger, not older, exactly the same. The next day, I showed Amy what I found. She didn't even flinch. "I think she's older than this town," she said quietly. "Older than the country." "Then what is she?" I asked. "Not human," Amy whispered. "Not anymore." She told me about a dream she'd had the night before. In it, she was standing at the edge of a black pit, surrounded by chanting. Miss Harrow was there, dressed in ceremonial robes, eyes glowing red. Eric was beside her, mouth sewn shut, tears of blood running down his face. "She said the pit remembers me," Amy whispered. "She said I was always meant to be the third." That made my blood run cold, because Rebecca had vanished. And now Amy believed she was next. We skipped class that afternoon and went to the back hallway, near the boiler room, the oldest part of the school. Harrow's classroom was just around the corner. Something about that hallway always felt colder, heavier. Amy found it first. A trapdoor hidden beneath an old roll of carpeting. Rusted hinges. A faded symbol burned into the wood. The spiral. I didn't want to open it. Every part of my body told me no. But Amy said, "We need to see." We lit our phone flashlights and climbed down into the dark. The air was wet, warm. It smelled like damp earth and metal, like blood and dirt. We followed a narrow tunnel, winding like a snake, until we reached a chamber carved out of stone. Moss clung to the walls. Roots twisted across the ceiling. At the center of the floor, someone had drawn the spiral in ash. Around it were bones, candles, burnt books, and handprints, hundreds of them blackened and smeared, all reaching toward the center. In the middle of it all, a pit, not wide, just big enough for a person. I swear it was breathing. Amy stepped closer, her eyes locked onto the spiral. "It's calling," she murmured. "It's always been calling. We need to get out of here," I said, but she didn't move. And then we heard it, a voice from the pit, faint, echoing. "3 have seen. 2 remain." We ran. That night I saw Eric again. He was standing outside my window, not knocking, just staring. His eyes were pitch black. No weights, no pupils. And in his hand, he held something. It was a piece of paper. When I opened my window, he didn't speak, just handed it to me and walked away. On the paper was a drawing. The pit, the spiral, 5 figures standing around it. One was lying down, one was holding a knife, and one, drawn in red, was watching. There are things you see that never leave you. Images that burn themselves behind your eyelids, like scars on your mind. That night, standing at my window, holding Eric's drawing, I knew something had changed. It wasn't just happening to us anymore. We were part of it. The next morning, I tried to talk to Eric. He was sitting on the bleachers before first bell, hunched over, mumbling to himself. I approached slowly, careful not to spook him. "Eric, what's happening to us?" He looked up. His eyes were normal again, but hollow, like there was something behind them watching with him. "It's already started," he said. "You should have stayed away from the pit." "What is it?" I asked. "It's not a what," he whispered. "It's a who. And she promised us things. Promised me silence, peace." His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the fear break through. "We're the lock, Jason. She's the key. And the door." He tapped the side of his head. "It's in here." That same day, during history class, Miss Harrow gave us a new assignment. She passed around thin black sheets of paper, smooth like velvet with no ink visible on them, until you tilted them just right and saw words written in dark, oily script. Mark your place. Choose your role. 1 to bleed, 1 to bind, 1 to guide, 1 to open, 1 to witness. Amy raised her hand. Harrow just stared at her. Is this real? Amy asked. Miss Harrow smiled. For the first time since she arrived, she smiled. It's always been real, she said softly. History is not written. It's bound in flesh. That night, Amy and I went back to the trapdoor. We had to. Whatever was happening, it was getting closer, and we needed answers. This time, we brought flashlights, rope, salt. We read somewhere that salt kept things out, or maybe in. Either way, it felt like a line we could still draw. The spiral was still there in the chamber, but now there were fresh footprints in the dust. Bare feet, long, dragging steps that circled the pit. Amy froze when she saw the walls. Dozens of new handprints had appeared since last time, some small like a child's, some impossibly large. She knelt by the edge of the pit. It's growing, she said, feeding. Then we heard it, from deep below, a low, guttural chanting, like 100 voices whispering through mud. Not words, just sound. Do you hear that? Amy whispered. I nodded. It's calling someone, I said. And then I saw it, a face, just for a second, rising in the darkness of the pit. Pale skin stretched over a long, eyeless skull. No mouth, just rows of small holes along the neck, quivering like gills. I fell back, heart hammering. We have to leave, I gasped. But Amy didn't move. She was staring down, her lips moving. Bleed, bind, guide, open, witness. She was repeating the lines from the assignment. Amy? I grabbed her arm. Don't. Her eyes snapped to mine. Her pupils were spiraling, literally, like ink swirling in water. He's already chosen his role, she whispered. Eric is the one who opens. That weekend, Eric stopped coming to school. We heard rumors. He'd had some kind of breakdown, screamed in the middle of math class, tore up his textbook, started writing spirals on the floor in his own blood. They said he was sent home, but I knew better. He was with her now. The next Monday, Miss Harrow gave us a test. Each desk had a single sheet of paper. One question, handwritten in black ink. Would you sacrifice one to save the rest? Amy looked at me, pale as bone. I wrote nothing. Miss Harrow walked between our desks, long fingers trailing along our chairs, humming a song I didn't recognize, but somehow knew. Then she stopped beside Amy. You've seen it, haven't you? She said. Amy nodded slowly. Good, Harrow whispered. We need a guide. That night I had another dream. I was back in the pit. The 5 of us stood around it again. But this time, Rebecca and Dean were gone. Just Eric, Amy, and me. I turned to Eric. His eyes were pitch black. His mouth was sewn shut. Amy stood across from me, holding a candle made of bone. And from the pit, a voice said, 3 remain. The spiral turns. The days blurred together. I couldn't tell if it was Tuesday or Thursday. Time no longer felt real. I stopped going to class. I stopped seeing my friends. I only saw Miss Harrow and the pit. And the whispers. Amy was gone. It was a Tuesday. I had just gotten back to school after days of hiding out at home, trying to ignore the growing panic in my chest. I needed answers. I needed to know what was coming next. When I walked into the hallway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her locker. It was still locked, but the door hung open a crack, as if someone had forced it. Inside, her notebook, that sketchbook she always carried around. It was open to a page she had been working on for weeks. There, drawn in thick black ink, was a spiral. But in the center was the pit, and in front of it 5 figures. One of them was kneeling, its hands covering its face. The 5th figure was drawn in red. I slammed the locker door shut and ran to Harrow's classroom. But when I got there, the door was locked. No one was inside. I didn't see Amy for days. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the spiral, about what had happened to Rebecca and Eric. And then on Friday, I found a note in my backpack. It was written in Amy's handwriting. I am the third. I am the guide. Don't follow me. It will open with or without you. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Amy was the third. She had become part of it. She was the guide, the one who would lead us to the pit. And the worst part? She knew. She knew that whatever was coming next would be too much for me to bear. That evening, I snuck into the library again. The book was still there, hidden under the same stack of dusty books. I opened it to the page with the list of names: Jason, Amy, Eric, Rebecca, Dean. And then I saw it, in tiny, faded letters at the bottom of the page. The witness must make a choice. I didn't want to know what that choice was, but deep down I knew. I was the last one, the fifth, and I had to decide what role I would play. Saturday night, I found myself standing in the same hallway again, the one that led to the boiler room. I had to go back. I had to see it again. I didn't want to, but the whispers were louder now. I grabbed the flashlight and a salt shaker. This time I wasn't going in unprepared. The trapdoor was exactly where we left it, the same worn wood, the same faded symbols carved into it. I opened it slowly, holding my breath. The tunnel beneath was the same, dark, narrow, cold. I descended, step by step, my heart pounding harder with each one. I couldn't stop now, couldn't turn back. I had to face it. When I reached the chamber, I froze. Amy was standing at the edge of the pit. Her back was turned to me, her arms outstretched, as if she were waiting for something, waiting for someone. And there, in the middle of the pit, something was rising. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a creature. It was something ancient, something that had been buried beneath the school for hundreds of years. It was a presence, a force, an ancient god of darkness and decay. Its eyes, if it even had eyes, burned with the same spiral that had been haunting us all. Couldn't breathe. Amy! I yelled, but she didn't turn around. Then I heard the voice again. This time, it wasn't coming from the pit. It was coming from Miss Harrow. She stepped out from the shadows, a smile creeping across her face. "Welcome, Jason," she said. "You've made it to the final moment." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Amy's voice echoed in my ears, as if it were both hers and mine. "The pit remembers, and it will open with or without you." I stepped forward, against everything in me. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to be the witness anymore, but I was. The spiral on the ground began to glow. Amy's hand shot out toward the center of the pit, and in her grip, she held something. A knife, made of bone and blood. She held it above her heart. "One to bleed," Harrow's voice echoed. "One to bind." Amy plunged the knife into her chest. The ground shook. The pit began to open, sucking the light and warmth from the air. The whispers turned to screams. And then I heard a voice, the one I had been dreading for weeks. "Jason, choose." I turned to face the spiraling, black hole that had opened before me, but something stopped me. Something was calling me. The spiral, the door. And as the shadows closed in, I realized I was the fifth, and the choice? It wasn't to escape. The world around me was falling apart. The air was thick with darkness. The pit yawned before me, an abyss swallowing all light. It was a force, not a place. Pulled at me, gnawed at my mind, and everything within me screamed for me to run, to escape. But I couldn't. Amy was gone. The others were gone. It was just me now. And Miss Harrow. "Jason, choose." The voice was everywhere, within me and outside me, in the air, in the walls, in the pit. It spoke with 1,000 voices, and none of them were human. I turned toward Miss Harrow, but she was no longer the woman who had taught us history. She was something older, something that didn't belong in this world. Her eyes glowed with a sickly, otherworldly light. Her smile stretched too wide. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her hands, long and thin, seemed to ripple as if they were made of shadows. "It's simple, Jason," she said. her voice a low hum in the air. "You're the last one, the fifth, and the door won't open without you." I felt my knees buckle. The weight of her words crashed down on me. The pit behind her began to writhe, a swirling vortex of shadow and light. Something ancient, something alive, pulsed within it. I could feel it calling me. "You have a choice," Miss Harrow whispered. "The same choice all of them had before you. Will you step into the spiral? Will you let it open?" I looked down at the ground, at the blackened symbols and the faint traces of blood staining the stone floor. The spiral was there, pulsing softly in the center, a sign of the ritual, of the end. I didn't want to choose, but I had no choice. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the chamber. I could feel it freezing the edges of my soul, biting into my flesh. The whispers grew louder, filling my ears with fragmented voices. Rebecca, Amy, Eric, Dean. All of them, caught in the endless loop of the ritual. They were trapped, and so was I. One to bleed. Harrow's voice was a low growl. One to bind. I looked up, and for the first time I understood. I was the witness. I had always been the witness. The ritual required 5, one to lead, one to open, one to bind, one to bleed, and the witness to record the story, to seal the door. I had to choose. Would I step into the pit? Would I become part of the ritual, like all the others before me? Or would I break it? I felt something inside me crack. The spiral on the floor was alive. The lines, the patterns, they moved. They pulled at my legs, my heart. They sang to me in voices I couldn't understand. Amy's voice rose from the darkness, whispering, "Jason, you have to choose." The air thickened, the light dimmed, and suddenly, I was no longer alone. The shadow that had risen from the pit, it had entered the room. Presence. Not human, not anything alive, just an ancient force, a god, or a demon. I didn't know. It spoke through the wind, through the whispers, through the dark. "Choose, Jason." The pit behind me gaped wider, the shadows reaching for me like hands, pulling me in. Couldn't move. My legs were frozen. My heart was frozen. But I had to move. I had to make the choice. Couldn't go in. I wouldn't. I refused to become part of it. I refused to follow in the footsteps of those before me, Rebecca, Eric, Amy. I refused to let Miss Harrow win. With every ounce of strength, I forced myself to take a step backward, away from the spiral. And then, without thinking, I reached into my pocket. I grabbed the salt shaker and threw it into the center of the spiral. The effect was instant. A loud crack echoed through the chamber, and the ground shook violently. The light in the pit flickered. Miss Harrow's smile faltered for a brief moment. The shadows around the spiral writhed and shrieked, as if they were burning. The pit trembled, and for the first time since I entered, I could feel the force losing its grip. The spiral, the door, began to close. Couldn't believe it. Miss Harrow hissed, her eyes flashing with rage. She extended her hand toward me, and the air seemed to crackle with power. "You foolish child," she snarled. "You think you can stop it?" I took a deep breath. I felt a surge of energy within me. The salt had done something, broken something. I could feel it. The door was closing. The spiral was fading. But Miss Harrow wouldn't let go that easily. She lunged at me, but before she could reach me, something else happened. The walls of the chamber began to collapse. The pit shattered. The shadow rose higher, its form stretching toward the ceiling. A vast, endless mass of darkness and noise. But it wasn't a single entity anymore. It was fragments, broken pieces of something much larger. Something ancient. And it was angry. I had broken the circle. I had disrupted the ritual. But in doing so, I had unleashed something far worse. I felt the darkness closing in around me, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The door to the pit had opened, but it hadn't been meant to close. I wasn't the witness anymore. I wasn't the one to seal the door. I was the one who had torn it open, and now I would have to face the consequences. I could feel it now, the weight of everything that was happening. The air was thick with something that wasn't air anymore. It was like I was breathing in pure darkness, each breath harder than the last. The walls of the chamber were still shaking, but now they were beginning to crack. The pit was no longer just a hole in the ground. It was alive, breathing, and the things that had been lurking within it were starting to break free. And I had let it happen. The sound of the ground cracking was deafening. I turned toward Miss Harrow, her face twisted into something unrecognizable, her features warping and stretching as if they were made of liquid, her body buckled and reformed, ripples of shadow and light flickering across her skin. "You shouldn't have done that," she hissed, her voice splitting into a dozen different tones at once. It was no longer a voice, it was a presence. I tried to speak, but the words were stuck in my throat. All I could do was watch as she took a step forward, her fingers elongating into claws. The pit behind her was no longer a pit. It was a rift, a tear in the very fabric of reality. I could see something moving within it, something huge. The shape wasn't clear, but the pressure it exerted on the air around me was suffocating. It wanted out, and it was angry. "You can't stop it now," Harrow murmured, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. "You've opened it. The door is open, and nothing can close it." The walls around us began to bleed. The shadows pressed against my skin, pulling at me, as if they were trying to drag me into the rift. The floor was buckling under the weight of what was coming. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking, but I couldn't escape the pull of it. It was like the room itself was collapsing, folding in on itself. The shadows were growing, reaching out like hungry hands. "No!" I whispered, backing away, but the rift was growing. It was pulling everything in. Suddenly, I felt something cold wrap around my ankle. I looked down. A hand. A pale, skeletal hand. Its fingers long and cracked, gripping me with an unnatural strength. The hand pulled, dragging me toward the edge of the rift. I gasped, pulling against it, but the grip was like iron. Then, from the shadows, a voice. "You're the one who opened it," the voice said, and I recognized it. It was Amy, but it wasn't her. Her voice was distorted, as if it were coming from the very pit itself. I looked up, panic filling my chest. Amy's figure emerged from the dark corner of the chamber. Her body was distorted, twisted into something I could hardly recognize. Her eyes were black, her skin pale and stretched tight across her bones. "You should have left me," she said, her voice cold. "You should have stayed away from the pit." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Her body flickered in and out of focus, as if she was no longer entirely here. "It was never about saving you, Jason," Amy whispered, a twisted grin spreading across her face. "It was about joining me, joining us." The shadows were everywhere now. They clung to the walls, to the ceiling, to the air itself. I could feel them inside me, wrapping around my insides, feeding on my fear. The presence from the pit was growing stronger, and I could hear it now, a low, unearthly growl that vibrated in the bones. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew this much. I was running out of time. I turned, looking for an escape, but there was nothing left. The walls were closing in, the pit was growing wider, and the shadows were crawling toward me. I had to fight back. But how? The salt. I still had the salt, and the rope, and whatever was left of the will to live. I turned back to Harrow. The twisted figure that had once been my teacher was now more shadow than flesh, more nightmare than woman. "You can't stop it," she taunted. "You won't stop it." But I wasn't listening anymore. I grabbed the rope from my bag, feeling the weight of it in my hands. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. I threw it into the pit. The rope fell, dangling for a moment, before it was sucked in by the rift. The shadows twisted around it, but the rope held firm. I pulled. The force that resisted me was stronger than anything I had ever felt. It was as if the entire world was trying to tear the rope from my hands. But I didn't let go. And then I felt it. The pull stopped. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The shadows held their breath. And in that brief moment, I knew what I had to do. I didn't need to fight the rift. I needed to seal it. I needed to bind it. I pulled the rope with everything I had, and in one final act of desperation, I wrapped it around the edge of the pit, tying it to the nearest pillar. Then I took the salt and began to pour it into the rift. The shadows screamed as the salt hit them, and the rift buckled. The growls from the pit grew louder, but the darkness started to retreat. The rift shuddered and then, slowly, began to close. Miss Harrow shrieked, her voice torn between rage and desperation. But it was too late. The pit began to shrink. The shadows faded, and as the rift closed, the darkness lifted. The air cleared, and for the first time in days I could breathe again. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. But I wasn't alone. Amy's twisted form hovered at the edge of the pit. She looked at me one last time, her face a mask of anguish. You've ruined it, she whispered, before vanishing into the shadows. And then it was over. The pit was gone. The shadows were gone. The nightmare was gone. But I knew one thing. It wasn't over. I thought it was over. The shadows had receded, the rift had closed, and Miss Harrow, she was gone. Felt like the end. But deep down, I knew it was just the beginning. The world felt different. Every step I took, every breath I drew, felt heavier. It was as if something was lingering, just out of reach, waiting to follow me. The pit had closed, but the door I had opened wasn't just a physical one. It was something deeper. I had made a choice, but I had no idea what the cost would be. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard them, the whispers, soft at first, like a breeze rustling leaves. But the longer I stayed awake, the louder they grew. The voice of Amy, the voice of Miss Harrow, the voice of the pit. It was all mixed together, swirling in my head like a storm. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was imagining things. But the whispers were real. "You opened it, Jason," they would chant, over and over again. "The door is still open. You are the witness." One night, when I finally allowed myself to fall into a restless sleep, something happened. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a nightmare either. I woke up, but I wasn't in my room. I was standing in a forest. The trees were twisted, their trunks blackened and gnarled, as if they had been scorched by fire. And in the distance, there was a figure. It was Miss Harrow, but she wasn't like she was before. She was taller, her silhouette looming like a shadow cast by a dying sun. Her eyes glowed with that same sickly light, but now it seemed to be consuming her from the inside. "You can't run from it, Jason," her voice echoed, distorted and hollow. "You've become part of it. You always will be." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I reached for her, but she vanished into the trees, leaving only the echoes of her words behind. And then the forest moved. The trees bent toward me, their branches reaching out like hands, trying to grab me. I woke up with a jolt, gasping for air. It was then that I realized the whispers weren't just in my head. They were real, and whatever Miss Harrow had become, whatever the pit had awakened, it was still here. It was inside me. I could feel it, the pull, the pressure, the hunger. The pit had been a doorway, and I hadn't just sealed it. I had opened something worse. I had unleashed something that would never leave me. Days passed in a blur. The whispers never stopped. They followed me everywhere. At school, at home, in my sleep. I started seeing things. Shadows moving in the corners of my vision. Glimpses of people who weren't there. And then there was the feeling of eyes watching me always. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the place where it all started, the old school building, the basement, the pit. The door was still there, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a door to the physical world. It was a doorway to something else. I stepped forward, my feet moving without my consent. The whispers were louder now, and as I stepped closer, I felt the pull again. It wasn't just the pit calling me. It was the other side. It was the thing I had unleashed. I reached out to touch the door, and instantly, the world around me shattered. I fell, but not into the pit. I fell into a place that didn't make sense. A world of twisted shapes and distorted sounds. A place where time didn't exist. Felt like I was being torn apart and remade. And in that place, I saw them. The faces. The faces of those who had been taken by the pit. Rebecca, Amy, Eric, Dean. But they weren't the same. They were changed. Their eyes were wide open, hollow. Their skin was pale, stretched thin. They looked at me, but they didn't speak. They just stared, their faces a mask of despair. I felt something press against me, pulling me deeper into the void. And then, a voice. "You're one of us now," it said, and I recognized it. It was Amy's voice. "You opened the door, Jason. You let us in." I felt it then. The mark. It was on my skin. I hadn't seen it before, but it was there now, burned into my wrist. A spiral. The same spiral that had haunted us all, the symbol of the pit. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The world around me grew darker. The faces of those who had been lost closing in. They were calling me, pulling me in. "We're all part of it now," Amy's voice echoed. "The door is open, can never be closed again." I tried to run, but I couldn't. The ground beneath me shifted, and I fell to my knees. The world was collapsing, crumbling around me. And then, from the darkness, I heard it, the final whisper. "Jason, you were always the fifth." I woke up, but I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was in my bed, cold sweat soaking my sheets. But it didn't feel like I was awake. Felt like I was still there. The whispers were louder now. They filled the air, drowning everything else out. I felt the mark burning on my wrist. It wasn't a dream. None of it had been a dream. The pit was still open. The shadows were still here. And I was still the witness. The fifth. The darkness inside me was growing. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was in my blood, in my bones. Every day, I could feel it. A pressure building behind my eyes, like a storm waiting to break. The whispers never stopped, and with each passing hour, they grew louder. I couldn't escape them, no matter how hard I tried. I couldn't escape it. The mark on my wrist had begun to change. The spiral, once faint, had deepened, its lines sharper, darker. It felt like something was crawling beneath my skin, like I was no longer me. The worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted to escape anymore. I was becoming different. I'd wake up in strange places, places I didn't remember going to, places that felt wrong, as if I didn't belong there. The streets of my town had started to twist and warp, their shapes bending like they were made of something soft and pliable, not concrete and steel. And the people, they were changing too. At first, I thought it was just the exhaustion getting to me. But when I saw my reflection in a store window, I knew something was horribly wrong. My face was paler, my eyes darker, the lines on my face sharper. I looked older, worn out, but more than that, I looked empty, like I was disappearing, like the thing in the pit was taking me piece by piece. I started seeing them, the others, the ones who had been taken, the ones whose faces haunted me in my dreams. Rebecca, Amy, Eric, Dean. They were all there, standing just outside my vision, waiting for me to turn and see them. But they didn't speak. They didn't move. They just stood there, staring with empty, soulless eyes. Sometimes, I could hear their voices in my head, faint whispers calling my name. "It's not over, Jason," Rebecca's voice would murmur, the words like a chill crawling under my skin. "You opened it. You let them in." I could feel their eyes on me even when I wasn't looking at them. It was like they were inside me, living in my thoughts, feeding on my fear. And the worst part? I was starting to see the things they had become. Their bodies twisted and warped, their faces stretching into something monstrous. And in the distance, behind them, the pit called to me, louder, stronger. It was waiting for me to join them. It wasn't just the visions that were haunting me now. It was the pull. I could feel it all the time, like an invisible hand wrapping around my chest, squeezing the breath out of me. Every night, I'd wake up in cold sweats, gasping for air. But when I looked around, nothing had changed. The pit was still open. The shadows were still here. The pull was growing stronger. I tried to fight it. I went to the library. I went to the park. I even tried to talk to my parents, but nothing helped. The world was closing in around me, and every step I took brought me closer to something I didn't want to face. I couldn't escape the darkness, no matter how far I ran. It was inside me, in my soul. It was waiting, watching, until I was ready. One night, when the whispers grew unbearable, I went back to the school building, back to the basement where it had all started. The door was still there, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, it felt alive, like it was breathing, pulsing with something I couldn't comprehend. I reached out to touch it, and in that moment I saw her, Miss Harrow. She was standing at the edge of the pit, her form a blur of shadow and light. Her eyes glowed with that same sickly hue, but now they were full of something else. Anger. And something darker. Something that made my skin crawl. "You don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice a twisted version of the one I remembered. "You are one of us now. You always were. The pit didn't just open, Jason. It chose you." I backed away from the door, panic rising in my chest. I thought I had closed it. I thought I had sealed it. But now, the truth was clear. There was no escape. The pit wasn't just a door to another world. It was a part of me. Part one had awakened. "It chose you," Miss Harrow repeated, her smile widening. "You opened the door and now you belong to it. You always did." I turned and ran, but the walls of the school were closing in around me. The shadows were everywhere now, crawling across the floor, creeping along the walls. The air felt thick, suffocating. I stumbled, my head spinning, and then I saw it. The pit. It wasn't in the basement anymore. It was here, right in front of me. The rift had followed me. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. The pit was no longer just a rift. It was something more, something ancient, something hungry. It was a force that wanted me, wanted all of us to fall into it. I could hear it now. The voices of those who had been taken. The others. They were calling to me, begging me to join them. "Come, Jason," they whispered. "You were always meant to be one of us." I could feel the darkness pressing in, filling my mind with images of the twisted faces, the broken bodies, the endless void. The pit was pulling at me, and I could feel myself wanting to fall into it. But then I heard it again. "You opened the door, Jason, and now, you must close it." It wasn't Miss Harrow this time. It was Amy. I closed my eyes, the whispers growing louder. The choice was clear, but it wasn't easy. I had a decision to make. I could step forward, fall into the pit, and become part of the darkness forever. Or I could fight. I could resist, and maybe, just maybe, I could close the door I had opened. The shadows were closing in. The pit was reaching out to claim me, but something inside me snapped. Couldn't give in. I had to fight. I had to close the door. I could feel the darkness all around me. The shadows stretched and twisted, clawing at my skin, at my very soul. The pit was pulling me in, its force so strong that I could almost taste it in the air. But I couldn't give in. Not now. Not when I was so close to ending it all. The whispers were deafening now, filling every corner of my mind. "You're ours, Jason," they chanted. "You opened the door. You belong to us." I stood in front of the rift, my feet frozen to the ground. I could feel the cold air coming from it, the oppressive weight of it pressing against my chest. I had to make a choice. I could step forward, give in to the darkness, and let the pit claim me. Or I could fight. I could resist and try to find a way to close the door that had been opened. A door I had opened, but the cost would be high. I knew that now. The air around me grew thick, suffocating. I could barely breathe. I thought about the faces of my friends, of those who had been taken by the pit. Amy, Rebecca, Eric, Dean. They were all there, their twisted faces staring at me from the edge of the rift. They wanted me to join them. They wanted me to give in. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I thought about the first day I had stepped into Miss Harrow's class. How everything had seemed so normal, so ordinary. I thought about the lessons, about her strange smile, and how I had been drawn to her, pulled into the darkness without even realizing it. I had chosen to open the door, and now I had to choose to close it. But how? How could I undo what I had done? The answer came to me clear as day. The pit wasn't just a place. It was a part of me. It was inside me, inside all of us. It was a force that had always been there, waiting for someone to unlock it. Someone like me. I had awakened it, and now I had to banish it. But the cost was steep. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The pit seemed to pulse, its darkness reaching out to pull me in. The shadows were so thick now I could barely see. The whispers were louder than ever, urging me to give in. "Join us, Jason," they hissed. "It's too late to turn back. You are ours." But I knew what I had to do. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the edge of the rift. The moment my fingers brushed against it, a jolt of pain shot through my body. It was like 1,000 needles piercing my skin, like something inside me was being torn apart. And then I saw her, Miss Harrow. Her form loomed in front of me, her twisted smile wider than ever. Her eyes glowed with that sickly light, but now it was different. It wasn't just a reflection of the pit. It was her. She was the pit. "You can't close it, Jason," she said, her voice like ice. "The door is open, and once it's open, can never be closed." Her words were like a weight pressing down on me, but I refused to listen. Couldn't. I had to do this. "It's not too late," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I can stop it." I felt the pull again, stronger this time. The pit was reaching out to me, trying to drag me into its depths. The shadows closed in around me, and I felt myself starting to lose control. I was losing myself, but I couldn't stop, couldn't give up. I focused on the mark on my wrist, the spiral. It burned with an intensity one had never felt before. It was a part of me, and now I had to use it. I had to close the door. I closed my eyes, my heart racing. I thought back to everything I had seen, everything I had learned. The door was a symbol, a doorway to something ancient, something powerful. But it wasn't just about opening it. It was about controlling it. And in that moment, I understood. I had to take control. I took a deep breath, my body trembling with exhaustion. The whispers were maddening now, the darkness suffocating. The pit was reaching out, but I refused to let it claim me. I reached up, touching the mark on my wrist. The spiral burned like fire, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to sever the connection. I had to cut off the darkness. With a single, decisive motion, I pressed my fingers into the mark. And then, everything went black. I woke up. I was back in my room, lying in my bed. The darkness was gone. The whispers had stopped. The pit was no longer in front of me. It was as if the world had returned to normal. But I wasn't sure it was. I looked down at my wrist. The mark was gone. The spiral had vanished, leaving no trace. But I could still feel it. The darkness was inside me, like a memory that would never fade. I was free. But was I really? I didn't know. Couldn't be sure. The pit was gone, but the lesson had been learned. And some doors should never be opened.